Hello, my name is Bruce Perry. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I, first of all, would like to say thank you for asking me to share a little bit of our work with you today. And I just want to share that uh, I and all of my colleagues are just heartbroken about what's happened in your country, and we are doing what we can to help, and we will continue to do that, for as long as it takes to help our colleagues and friends in Turkey deal with all of this. Some of you may know, we've already given a series of presentations, some of which are available already online, and we'll continue to provide some teaching and support and consultation to our colleagues in a variety of different organizations that are based in Turkey. And this is one of those opportunities as well. So I just want to say that the volume of work that will be involved in helping individuals, families, communities get through all of this and begin a healing process is enormous. And that's part of what I want to talk about today, is just getting some context and perspective on the scope of the challenge. I have had the opportunity to work with a variety of communities and families and individuals who've been in very large scale community catastrophes. And I have to say that we have learned a lot, but we still have a lot more to learn. And despite the fact that we have learned some things, each situation is different. Each community and each culture brings a unique perspective, unique strengths, and unique challenges. And we are learning already from our colleagues and from the people we have been working with in Turkey about some of these things. So this will be an ongoing process where I'm sure that we as a working group, the people that I work with, will probably benefit more than what we can possibly give to the community of practitioners and the people who've been impacted by this. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to share what we've learned and look forward to learning from many of you in the future. I'm going to show a bunch of slides, and these slides are, I didn't hand them out in advance, and I will try to make some of them available for people who are interested after the presentation. We'll be posting materials in Turkish and some of our presentations translated into Turkish that will be available for people over time as we build up a library of materials that can be helpful. So let me go ahead and share my screen. There we go. And I think I'll start with this one. This is the a place where you can get some of the content that we will be posting that will be in Turkish. Those of you who read English and have the patience to sort through some of the more obscure research that we're involved in, you can get some of that information here. Those of you who use social media, we actually have a number of, I think, useful materials right here. So if for those of you who want more information, feel free to check that out. So let me just start at the beginning, and let's start with this. Over the years, we've had the opportunity to work with a lot of large-scale catastrophic events, school shootings, 9/11, tsunamis, hurricanes, um, natural disasters that involve hundreds of thousands of people, all the way down to individual traumatic events where there's a single traumatic experience. A child, for example, might witness the murder of a parent. Um, and part of what we've been able to tease out over the years is the degree of risk for ongoing mental health problems over the years that are related to exposure to that traumatic event. And the reason this is, I'm putting this up is because I think it's important for people to appreciate the scope of the problem and recognize that an already overwhelmed mental health system is rarely able to meet the needs of families and communities when there are additional significant large-scale traumatic events. And so I'm going to just show you something that we've put together a simple tool that we use when we're just trying to figure out what the mental health burden is going to be after a trauma. And this inner circle of risk are the people who will have been most directly impacted. In this case, they will be the people who were on site during the earthquake, physically injured, the people who lost loved ones, who witnessed death, who witnessed injury, who lost their homes, and so forth. The second, and these individuals, and again, this may be an underestimate actually, about 80% of those people at some point over the next few years will benefit from a trauma-sensitive mental health contact. And some people will need much more ongoing therapeutic help. And if it was available, they would definitely benefit from it. The problem is that the mental health systems in every country, even countries that have an abundance of mental health professionals, even those systems are overwhelmed already. So you have fewer people that with a lower percentage of risk, but you have more people in this secondary group, and you know, this second group, the primary risk group, and then the secondary risk group. Same thing. There'll be a lot of people in this group, people who lived in the community, who knew the affected people, and the secondary responders, which includes the mental health professionals who are doing the work with these families and in that community. And then the tertiary impact, you know, the people who are impacted as this ripple of trauma cascades through a community. Now, if you take an event, a simple event like a child who witnesses a parent get killed, that the individuals that are in this, you know, ground zero category are not many individuals. They have high risk, but there's not many of them. But if you start to look at all of the people in the community who are impacted as this ripple of trauma, this catastrophic event ripples out into the community, you ultimately reach about 1,000 people. And of that 1,000 people, you know, 250 are going to have some mental health issues. So if you take a clinician and you say, all right, you have 1 hour a week to do your traditional mental health work, whatever it is, you know, whatever therapeutic approach you use, you have 1 hour a week with an individual, and you now have 250 new individuals in this community who need help. And so when you start to look at that, you realize, wow, if I had 12 clinicians who were spending half of their clinical hours a week doing this work, we would just be able to cover the need. Now, this is a big additional load on 12 clinicians. you know, I don't know any community that has a bunch of mental health clinicians who've got who will have half of their work week open to fill when there's individuals impacted by a single traumatic event. When you start to look at how these, you know, a larger event, let's say that this is a school shooting, and there are more people that are impacted, and you see that even, and again, I don't want to minimize a school shooting, but if you have a school shooting at a regular sized public school, you're going to need 230 clinicians spending half of their time to truly meet the mental health load that will be created by this event. And so, and again, and we've worked in a lot of these high profile school shootings in the United States, and the mental health communities are completely unprepared to meet the needs, and they're overwhelmed. And the thing about traumatic events like this, as you all know, is that they don't stop. It's not like getting an infection with, you know, having pneumonia sweep through the community, where you can treat somebody, and if you get the right treatment, the pneumonia is over. These problems are chronic and complex and dynamic, and in many cases, they can go on and on and on for years. So every time there's a traumatic event in a community, it adds to the allostatic load of that community. It adds to the burden of stress, distress, and trauma that community has to somehow manage. And then when you move out to a challenging situation like what happened in Turkey, and again, this is an underestimate of the people that were impacted directly, you start to see that, you know, you've got millions of people. And if you took, you know, if you just did 1 hour of mental health help for all of the people who are going to be impacted, that's half of it's 20 hours a week for 90,000 clinicians. Now, again, I don't want you to feel all demoralized and discouraged. It's easy to sort of get overwhelmed by this, particularly when you look at the fact that the number of clinicians in Turkey is about 24, 25,000. Now, these numbers may not be perfect. They're pretty close, but, you know, this is the mental health capacity, and this is the mental health burden from just the earthquake. So this is pretty overwhelming. Part of what we need to think about is that the traditional approach, the traditional come to my office, sit in my office, do mental health work, whatever technique you use, whether you're doing TFCBT or whether you're doing psychopharmacology or whether you're doing insight-oriented therapy or EMDR or whatever you're doing, that is going to be a drop in the bucket compared to the need of the community. Now, there's something that's really interesting about, you know, and important about looking at this curve, and that is to basically, when you look at this from a large scale perspective, if you can do things that diminish the risk in each group, that takes some of the risk out of that category, you can significantly decrease the burden, the need for mental health individuals and mental health time. However, this requires that the conventional mental health approach, the conventional medical model approach, is recognized as being inadequate, and other approaches, other supports, other things are looked at. And so that's what I want to throw out there. Here's what we know. First thing I want to just say, obviously, we're talking about a traumatic event. We're talking about traumatic stress. Many of you have heard about it and think about all of this in context of what we call post-traumatic stress, or the acute stress response. What does that look like? When does it become pathological? When does it become something that we need to clinically address? And part of what I want to talk about is the recognition and the importance and the awareness that stress is not the problem. Stress is an inevitable and unavoidable element of everyday life. And for those of you who know much about physiology, if you are a physician, you know all about homeostasis. You know all about systems that are in balance. You know that the systems that we have that help us walk and help us breathe and help us digest and help us pump blood and help us perceive things, all of these systems have a range of acceptable activity and regulation. And when any one of these systems is pushed or challenged or stressed, that's what stress is, there are stress response capabilities that bring that system back into balance. And this is happening every moment of every day. When you breathe, when you eat, when you sleep, when you walk, when you survey the social environment at work, when you communicate with somebody, your brain and body and rest of your body are continually having these little stressors that we are coping with in ways that are predictable, because we know that when we go to work, there's going to be certain kinds of stressors. I know that there's going to be traffic, and there's going to be a place to park, and there's going to be workload, and there's going to be meetings, and there'll be expectations about deliverables. And those are pretty predictable. And the level of activation, the amount of challenge for you is moderate. And there's elements of control. You know, if you go in a little bit early, you'll get a parking place, and that will be less stressful, but it will be more stressful getting up. So which system do you want to stress? Do you want to bring your work home? Do you want to do it? You want to leave your work at home? Some people like to do their problem solving and their paperwork at night after everybody goes to bed. And some people don't want to bring any paperwork home at all. They want to get it done at work before they go home. But if you have control over it, then it feels less stressful. It will literally cause less distress to you. So when you have opportunities for predictable, moderate, controllable stress, those systems actually get stronger. Again, I always use the example of exercise. If you consistently run up the stairs and you consistently challenge your cardiorespiratory system, running up one flight of stairs after a while, if you do it 2 or 3 times a day, it's not a stressor anymore, because your physiology has adapted. It's become stronger. It's become more capable. And what you need to do then to get to the same level of moderate stress is you have to run up 2 flights of stairs. And then pretty soon you are building cardiorespiratory fitness. And so predictable, moderate stressors actually help build resilience. Excuse me. So the problem is, when stressors are unpredictable, you have no control over what's going on in your world. We'll talk about unpredictable, an earthquake. It's extreme. You know, the earthquake, it killed people you knew, destroyed your community. You have nowhere to go to sleep. You don't feel safe being in buildings. It's prolonged because there are aftershocks, and there is infrastructure is ruined, and there is work and logistic issues about getting food and water and healthcare. All of those prolong the stressors and the unpredictability and the extreme nature of this event. So for the vast majority of people living through an earthquake, where there is so much death, injury, and destruction, is an incredibly overwhelming experience that is traumatic. And when these things happen, the stress response systems in your body change. So I talk about this in other presentations, and I'm sure you're going to hear about some of this from other speakers. But the physiology of how our body responds to stress is changeable. You can influence somebody so that rather than having what we would consider an average or typical stress response capability, you can have a stress response capability that is more resilient. You're more capable of tolerating moderate stressors before you have much change internally. But most of us are kind of on this neurotypical line. And if there's a moderate stressor, we have a moderate internal activation that involves activating parts of the brain that will allow us to solve the problem, survive the situation, and get past it and move forward. But if you have had all of these things over here that we've been talking about, if you have had unpredictability and extreme prolonged stressors, your stress response system is going to be altered in ways that make it so overwhelmingly sensitive that even the everyday stressors of life will make your brain act as if you are under continuous threat. And there's a lot of consequences to this. The first one is that you're going to get exhausted. Activating your stress response system at a high level consumes a tremendous amount of energy, and it overwhelms your body. And people can't stay in that state for very long without wearing out and wearing down. Now, the second part of this that I think is very important is that when your stress response system is activated in extreme ways like that, your brain, the systems in your brain that allow you to deal with threat are, let's say that they're flexible. There are multiple routes by which your brain can cope with a threat. And most people who've learned about trauma and most people who talk about PTSD talk about the fight or flight response. They talk about the hypothalamic pituitary axis, HPA axis, and cortisol release. And basically, they're mostly referring to what we call the fight or flight response, which is one of the most adaptive ways in which our brain can cope with threat. The problem, however, with a fight or flight response, when you are in an inescapably distressing or painful situation, and there is not a fight you can win, that keeping your body pumping out blood and preparing to fight or flee, that's no longer adaptive. It doesn't help you. And so what your brain has the capacity to recruit other stress response strategies. And one of the most pervasively used, one of the most important strategies, global neurobiological strategies that we use every day, and that is probably the predominant physiological adaptation to the current situation in Turkey, is what we call dissociation. So when your brain is in a situation where it basically does the calculus, it does the math, and it goes, listen, I running away from what's going on here is not going to help me, and there's nothing to fight. What are you going to fight? The earth? You can't fight the earth. And so your brain basically says, what I need to do is I need to withdraw from this painful situation. I need to make myself less emotionally reactive. I need to dissociate. I need to use my body's own painkillers to manage the emotional and sometimes physical pain associated with this. And we call that dissociation. And people basically robotically go through the motions, they tune out, They get almost zombified. They're emotionally blunted. Now, that's not permanent, and it's not always pervasive, and there will be breakthrough moments where people are overwhelmed and they cry and they're very externally reactive, and it's very obvious that they're overwhelmed. That's a manifestation of a breakthrough of kind of the fight or flight response. But in general, what happens is there's this back and forth process between this is so painful and so intense, I need to get numb. I need to retreat to an inner world where I feel like I have more control, where it feels safer, where I don't feel the emotional pain, and I'm going to just robotically go through the motions. And one of the major issues with dissociation, and I'm going to talk about this in much more detail in a seminar next week that I'm doing for our Turkish colleagues. So for those of you who want to see more about my thinking on this, you can follow that on our website. But one of the problems with dissociation is that it makes people look like they're doing fine. And when people come from the outside and they rush in after these traumatic events, like me, and like all of you, and like all the people that are coming in from all over the world to try to help, they come in and they have a lot of energy, and what they see is a tremendous amount of pain. And they themselves feel overwhelmed. They feel helpless. And that makes them feel, as a professional, they don't feel competent, right? So like some of the questions people will ask me about, what do I do in the situation where there's a 4-year-old child who heard their parents screaming for help for 8 hours while they were trapped helplessly and had their leg crushed, and now they're have like a leg amputated and a dead parent and 8 hours of traumatic experience and nowhere to live, and what should I do? Like, I don't know. I don't know any better than you, basically. And so my feeling of helplessness in this situation makes me much more vulnerable to wanting people to be resilient. I want you people, all you people impacted by this in Turkey, I wish you were all resilient. And I wish resilience was something I could just, magically spray on you, and then you would have grit and resilience, and all of a sudden there would be no pain. And me being in proximity to you, because of the contagion of human emotion, all the pain that you feel and I feel, that will go away. And so what happens is, when clinicians here who've rushed in to help see people who have dissociated and are numb, emotionally numb, and they're coping their very best with what's going on, that makes us, the rescuers, feel better, because we can't live with that constant pain any easier than they can live with it. So we want to minimize it. And so when we see, 50 people walking around and they are kind of going through the motions, and we go, oh, look how great that is. They're taking care of their kids, and they're getting food, and they're doing all the things they need to do. Our work here is done. And it gives justification for this quick disappearing act, which happens in all these big disasters, is that as long as the press is there, as long as there's money coming in, as long as this is the latest disaster, there'll be attention, there'll be money, there'll be people, and then guess what's going to happen? There's going to be an earthquake somewhere else. Or there's going to be a plane crash, or there's going to be, the war in the Ukraine. And so the attention of the mental health community and the trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive organizations all across the world will pivot attention and energy into these other situations. And I can guarantee you, in a year, the number of people that are volunteering and sending money and giving support for the millions of people in Turkey that need it is going to be way lower than it is right now. And ironically enough, the needs actually increase. The need for mental health help is really upfront, is not that urgent, because the people are so overwhelmed with moment-to-moment living that they're not able to do some of the more advanced or more complex trauma work around grief and loss and moving on. That is going to happen out here. And yet we don't have a lot of people to help them do that out here because they all left. Now, this happens in well-resourced environments. This happens in under-resourced environments. This is going to happen. This happened with, other natural disasters in Turkey. People who have been part of this narrative have seen this happen time and time again. And one of the challenges is, in the face of the disappearance of conventional mental health providers and the lack of capacity of mental health providers, right? We don't have that many providers. So in the face of both of those facts, here's what we need to do. We need to use our expertise as people who understand stress, trauma, development, the inner world. We have access to a lot of these clinical tools and toolkits. Our job has to become the conductor of the orchestra. We have to help shift the way we do our work. We need to think about how we can take advantage of some of the embedded stress modulating and resilience building practices that are part and parcel of the human community. Now, the good news is that humankind and human beings have dealt with catastrophic and traumatic situations for thousands of generations prior to the development of the DSM, prior to the invention of even the concept of psychiatry. And those ancient and historically, if you will, and empirically survivable practices have a lot to teach us. And I think that, when people talk about evidence-based, whatever, I can't think of a more powerful evidence than the observation that independently, human living groups on multiple continents converged on the same core elements for dealing with catastrophe, community soothing and regulating and healing practices that are very similar, whether you're in Africa or North America or Asia or Australia. Very similar elements to what were these stress buffering and healing experiences. And I believe that we in the mental health profession have to think about how we're going to enrich and create supports so that the community and the family and the culture's natural healing mechanisms can be supported and facilitated and catalyzed. So, a couple things. Biology tells us this: if we can make things that are stressful more predictable, if we can moderate the intensity of the stress and we can bring elements of control, we can take things the exact same part of the brain, the exact same systems that make you sick from trauma can be what you need to heal from trauma. So just a couple things about this and then I'll stop. First thing, first big bucket, psychoeducation, really. If you give people clear explanations about what's normal, what you can expect, what they're going to feel like over the next 3 months, 6 months, and don't pathologize a whole range of phenomenon that are associated with acute stress, grief, and dealing with trauma. You help people understand that why they're exhausted. You help people understand why they can't concentrate. You help people understand, you know, why these nightmares are happening, why these intrusive ideations happen. Help them understand, because the most interesting thing about the way your internal stress response works is that if things are unknown, it makes us feel more dysregulated than if we know what it is. So you can help a lot of people in 1 hour if you can educate them about these concepts and make them all feel a little bit better. And you can give them materials that help them understand it. And you can give them resources so that they're anticipating what they may experience. Now, the second bucket, you can help people learn how to regulate their own stress response, to learn techniques to calm down, to regulate. And the great news is everybody has a set of their own personal toolkit. They like to knit, they like to run, they like to do art, they like music, they like to dance, they like to sit and have conversation. All of those things are regulating. These are things that will take a high activated stress response and make it more moderate. And so encourage people to reconnect and do those things that made them feel like they belonged, like they felt good. Help mostly remember the power of movement and the power of touch and the power of community. All of these things will help them. Encourage people to move forward, literally, not just emotionally, but physically. And even in the absence of any cognitive or emotional capacity to move forward, move your feet. Get up and move. If you move, you will feel better. And that will moderate and regulate your stress response systems in the central nervous system. And finally, help people figure out and move away from that helplessness that will be inevitable after a huge catastrophic event like this. Help them see that there are things you do control. You can control, you know, the rituals you use before you go to bed. You can control when you eat. You can control to some degree what you eat. You can control and structure and physical activity, whether it's exercise or taking a walk or making sure that you do get up and move and that you do call a friend and that you do, because a really important part of this is recognizing that there are things that you can control. Not everything is in the uncontrollable bucket. The other thing that's really important is to help people quit wasting energy and focus on things that they don't have any control over. And so little by little, what you want them to do is to start transitioning their brain's thinking and ruminations away from these unpredictable, uncontrollable things over towards things where they do have more control. Help them do things that are more moderate. Help them recapture ritual, routine, structure, and that will bring predictability out of the unpredictable. And if you do those things, you don't need as many direct mental health hours to help people. Now, I could go on, and I've already, I don't want to push this too far, but so the key point from my perspective is this: the scope of the problem is beyond the capacity of any conventional mental health system to address. In the United States, when we had Hurricane Katrina, which was nowhere near as destructive as the earthquake you experienced, we still had thousands and thousands and thousands of individuals who had unmet mental health needs. And I expect that to be the case in Turkey as well. But that does not need to be catastrophic for the people of Turkey or the people that experience this. The more we encourage the reconnecting and the reweaving of social fabric and the embedding of knowledge and understanding about stress and distress and trauma, and give people a sense of hope rather than hopelessness, you will actually be tremendously effective. And I do believe that there are things that we can learn from this, and and we will be able to help people, and many people will struggle, but many people will move forward and rebuild a positive, productive, creative life. And so let me go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I hope the rest of the conference is helpful and that you continue to remember that all of this work that we do it has to follow the rules of human neurobiology. We can't do things that we are not biologically organized to do. And no human being on the planet is organized to have all of the emotional and physical bandwidth to help every single person in need. And so your ability to help in a transforming way, your ability to be fully present with the people you work with, will depend upon your ability to take care of yourself. So all of the people that do work with these families and with these individuals and with these systems that have been shattered by this earthquake, your ability to be effective is going to be directly related to your ability to stay regulated yourself, to stay rested, to respect your own boundaries, to respect your own need to recharge. And remember that this is going to be a lifelong process. And if you really do want to help these people, part of what you have to do is go, all right, listen, this happened in my country to people I know and love and people that I value. And, this is going to be with us my entire life in one way or another. The echo of this experience, because of the scope of the damage and the death and the injury, is going to have repercussions through the entire health and human service system in Turkey for at least this full generation and maybe beyond. But don't be discouraged by that. This has happened all through history, and human living groups have always been able to pull together and continue to try to make the world a better place for the people they live with and the people they love, and make things better for the next generation. And so there are things you can do and things you will do, and you're going to get tired, but I hope you remember that you need to rest along the way. This is not a sprint. This is not even a marathon. This is like the people that do those hikes from Mexico 3,000 miles north into Canada. It's like the people that walk all the way from Europe all the way through to Everest, and then climb Mount Everest. This is going to be a long, long journey, and you can do it, but you have to do it together, and you have to remember that you go further if you go slower. All right, I'm going to stop. Thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to connecting with all of you later.